Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 284, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski is almost here. It goes down on February 11th in Perth, Australia, and this is going to be the top 3 reasons I love UFC 284. I'm going to go from 3 to 1, 1 being the reason I most love UFC 284 and the reason I am most excited for this card. And usually when I do these videos, I have a bunch of honorable mentions. You look back at late 2022, you had UFC 280 stacked like crazy, UFC 281 stacked like crazy. But for UFC 284, it's really hard to find some bright spots on UFC 284, but I've dug deep on the card and I've come up with the top 3 reasons I love the card. I've already done a video called the top 3 reasons I hate UFC 284. I will link it down in the description as well as the end cards if you want to check it out after this video. And I'll be doing a bunch more UFC 284 content, including a bunch of UFC 284 prediction videos and a video grading the pay-per-view card as a whole. If you're interested in those videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of them. Starting off with number 3, the number 3 reason I love UFC 284 is Jack Della Maddalena is fighting on the card. We are getting Jack Della Maddalena versus Randy Brown. Now, while I don't agree that Jack Della Maddalena versus Randy Brown is really pay-per-view quality, especially not featured fight on a pay-per-view quality, it's probably a prelim headliner at best, maybe a pay-per-view opener. This is a great fight. Jack Della Maddalena, for those of you maybe newer fans, don't know who it is, he's a guy that came off Dana White's Contender Series. He's on a 3-fight win streak and a 3-fight first-round TKO streak. And he is a guy that a lot of people have high hopes for in the welterweight division. He is never in a boring fight. Of his 13 wins, 11 of them are by TKO or KO. He only has 1 win out of 13 that has ever gone to decision. And, you know, you look at his last fight with Danny Roberts, brutally finished him in the first round. The fight before that, defeated Ramazan Emeev. I mean, this was solid win after solid win. And even though it wasn't the best quality of opponents, he went out there and made them look like they did not belong. And I really believe Jack Della Maddalena is a prospect that we have to keep an eye on in the welterweight division. And Randy Brown, his opponent, while he's not the elite of the elite, he's another kind of prospect. He's been around for a lot longer, but he's looking very good. He's currently on a 4-fight win streak. He's coming off a win over Francisco Trinaldo. Randy Brown is an action fighter, and I really think that Jack Della Maddalena versus Randy Brown is going to be a very fan-friendly, exciting fight. And I believe that Randy Brown, again, he's not the elite of the elite, but I believe it is a step up in competition for Jack Della Maddalena. And I think if he defeats Randy Brown, his next fight will be a massive fight. And it'll be one of those fights to potentially propel him to the top 15. He's not there yet. But his next fight, I believe if he beats Randy Brown, let's say he goes out there and does it impressively, because for the most of Jack Della Maddalena's last few fights, most people expected him to win, most likely by TKO or KO. But the Randy Brown fight is going to be very difficult. Of 20 pro fights, Randy Brown has only ever been finished by KO or TKO twice. And one of them was by Vicente Luque. The other one was by Nico Price. So not horrible losses to have, not horrible guys to get finished by, especially considering Nico Price was all the way back in 2018 when he was a much better fighter. So this should be an action-packed fight. And I think this could kind of be, I know people are already kind of on the Jack Della Maddalena train, but I think this could be his coming out party on UFC 284. And I think that's the reason why the UFC has him on the pay-per-view main card, even though I believe he probably should be opening up. But really, you look at the UFC 284 main card, which is kind of falling apart, it probably is the 3rd best fight. So with this current bout order, it's really not a massive issue considering what the pay-per-view main card looks like, if that makes sense. Okay, moving on to the number 2 reason that I love UFC 284, and that is Yair Rodriguez is fighting. And I know that's kind of a similar thing to Jack Della Maddalena, but Yair Rodriguez is one of the most dynamic kickers I have ever seen in MMA, and just a dynamic striker in general. And he's fighting, it's Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett for an interim featherweight title. I'm not a big fan of the interim title. I think the UFC throws too many interim titles out there, and you have Volkanovski, who's been pretty active. It kind of does make sense just because you have Volkanovski going up to lightweight. Who knows if he wins that fight, may stay at lightweight. But Yair Rodriguez, he's always so exciting to watch. And in his last fight, we kind of got robbed of a performance because Brian Ortega got a shoulder injury early. And, we really didn't get to see that fight play out. And that was one of my most anticipated non-title fights of 2022. And we were all kind of left just super disappointed. And I know, people are saying, well, the fight really you didn't give us no answers in terms of Yair's skill set, from before the fight to after the fight, because the injury happened like in the first minute of the fight. And we didn't really get to see a performance from him. But you go back and look throughout his history, even his fight before Brian Ortega against Max Holloway, amazing back and forth fight. A lot of people thought that Yair Rodriguez, myself included, a lot of people thought that he had no chance against Max Holloway. Very competitive fight, very grueling fight. He clearly lost, but what a performance. And I think in this fight, I can't remember 100% certainty. I think I gave Yair Rodriguez the 5th round. So Yair Rodriguez, while he came into the sport very young, he is continuing to evolve his skill set. And even in a loss against Max Holloway, he looked excellent. The fight before that, he brutalized Jeremy Stephens with his kicks, ended up going to decision, which, obviously isn't the greatest look, especially where Jeremy Stephens is now. But at the time, Jeremy Stephens was pretty durable. The fight before that, back in November of 2018, I think this was the 25th anniversary card of the UFC. This is the craziest finish I've ever seen. Yair Rodriguez versus Chan Sung Jung. If you have not seen this fight, I want you to go watch this fight, because I don't remember round by round scorecard, but Yair Rodriguez was clearly losing on the scorecards to the Korean Zombie. And in literally the last 1 second of the fight, the last second of the 5th round, the Korean Zombie, obviously if you watch the Korean Zombie, he's not a guy that's going to sit there and just try to eke his way to a decision. He's not going to get up on the scorecards and just try to avoid the fight. Korean Zombie is rushing forward, trying to put a show on for the fans. Yair Rodriguez ducks under some strikes of the Korean Zombie and throws an upward elbow, like an upward back elbow, something we have really never seen before in MMA, catches the Korean Zombie and puts him out cold. Yair Rodriguez is just such a dynamic, crazy striker. That is probably the craziest finish I've ever seen. That is right up there, and I know this is going to sound like a weird comparison, but Irene Aldana, Macy Chaston, that up kick to the liver where it was like so crazy to get a TKO that way. I don't think in my entire life as an MMA fan, I've ever screamed as loud as I did when Yair landed that elbow. It was straight up insanity, and it slumped the Korean Zombie, who's known for his good chin. He went back there. He destroyed BJ Penn back in 2017. That doesn't mean much. The bicycle kick against Andre Fili, that KO that was in the 2nd round back at UFC 197 a while ago was crazy. And Yair has some of the best kicks in the game. And Josh Emmett, even though I know a lot of us like to crap on Josh Emmett a bit, he's always in exciting fights as well. The Calvin Kattar fight, even though I thought he lost, very exciting fight. The Dan Ige fight was pretty exciting. The Shane Burgos fight was exciting. And Josh Emmett has finishing power as well. He doesn't have like a whole lot of KOs and TKOs, but he does have nasty power. And for Yair, of his 14 wins, he only has 5 knockouts. But I think that kind of doesn't accurately represent the power that Yair Rodriguez has. He's fought some decent competition. He's been inactive for a bit. Not super recently. He's been out for about 8 months. But prior to his fight in 2021, he was out for 2 years. So I think a lot of people kind of forget about Yair Rodriguez, forget about how skilled he is. Because, the Brian Ortega win, a lot of people don't really count it because it happened as an injury. I picked him to win that fight, but again, we didn't see it play out. And then the Max Holloway loss, and that's his only 2 fights since October of 2019. So Yair's kind of slept on a little bit, but he's such a dynamic kicker. He's such a dynamic striker. Josh Emmett's going to move forward, going to look to strike with Yair, maybe even mix in the wrestling a little bit. But Yair's, wrestling is improving. And I'm just really looking forward to seeing Yair Rodriguez out there kicking at UFC 284. He has some of the fastest kicks in MMA, and I cannot wait to see Yair Rodriguez fight at UFC 284, considering I don't feel like I've gotten a fight out of him since November of 2021 when he fought Max Holloway in a very competitive fight. Moving on to the number one reason that I love UFC 284, and I think most of you can probably already guess it, before I even get to the reason. And that is that the main event, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski, is a true super fight. And I know I've said recently there's not a lot of hype around this fight. And I think it's a lot based on the fact that people think Islam Makhachev is going to win. A lot of people are confident that Islam Makhachev is going to win. So I think it's killing off the hype for this fight a little bit. But at the same time, the word super fight is thrown around way too much. The definition of a super fight, or at least as it used to be, was a champion versus a champion. And far too often, we get fights where you have just two guys from different weight classes. And oh, this is a super fight. That's a super fight. They weren't super fights. This is a true super fight. You have Islam Makhachev, who is the UFC undisputed lightweight champion on an 11-fight win streak. And I know people criticize the resume, but look what he did to Charles Oliveira. Super impressive win at UFC 280. And you have Alexander Volkanovski, who has never lost in the UFC. He's on a 22-fight win streak. Look what he did at UFC 276 against Max Holloway. Put a world-class performance on Max Holloway and put that argument to rest. A lot of people were saying, especially Max Holloway fans, Max Holloway's the uncrowned champion and Max Holloway won the second fight. And some people were even saying he won the first fight, which I thought was ludicrous. I thought Volkanovski clearly won the first fight. Second fight was razor close. I scored it for Volkanovski as well, but there was no doubt in that third fight. That was one of the best performances I have seen in my entire time as an MMA fan in a UFC championship fight. What Alexander Volkanovski did to a world-class fighter in Max Holloway was unbelievable back at UFC 276. The fight before that, he fought the Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie, absolutely beat the brakes off and probably should have been stopped by his corner. Maybe the doctor brutalized him, eventually TKO'd him in the fourth round. Chan Sung Jung is a very good fighter. Alexander Volkanovski made him look like he was not even UFC caliber. That's how bad he beat on him. Then the fight before that, Brian Ortega, another top-ranked featherweight, beat the brakes off of Brian Ortega. I know a lot of people like to say, oh, well, this was one of the best fights of the year. This was a one-sided beatdown by Alexander Volkanovski with a couple close submission attempts by Brian Ortega. And I mean, the resume of Alexander Volkanovski just goes on and on. He has a win over Chad Mendes when Chad Mendes was considered an elite featherweight. He has a win over Jose Aldo, and that has aged even greater than I could have ever imagined. I mean, Jose Aldo was a former champion at the time, but look what Jose Aldo went on to do after that. I mean, went down to bantamweight, fought for titles, was still an elite level fighter until the day he retired. So you have Alexander Volkanovski versus Islam Makhachev, who I know the wins aren't as great, but that win at UFC 280 over Charles Oliveira was incredible. He went out there and outclassed him. I mean, and then to get a finish and to find the finish after dropping him on the feet. So not only did he drop him on the feet, he went to the ground with Charles Oliveira and submitted him. World-class performance, dominant performance. And then you go back to some of his other wins. I understand it isn't against the best names. Bobby Green, Dan Hooker on short notice, Thiago Moises. But he's going out there and relatively he's dominating these guys. He made Bobby Green look like he didn't even belong in the UFC. Made Dan Hooker look like it was just a setup, easy win. I mean, the Thiago Moises win, he had a little bit of trouble with, but dominated the fight for the majority of it. Took him to the fourth round to get a finish, but he eventually found the finish. And Islam Makhachev, of his 23 wins, he has 15 by stoppage. I mean, that is insane. And for Alexander Volkanovski, not as many, or he does have exactly as many. He has 15 stoppage wins out of 25. So this is a very compelling fight. Skill for skill. Both guys are the elite of the elite. You have Islam Makhachev with his elite level wrestling, his elite level jiu-jitsu, and his ever-improving striking. For Alexander Volkanovski, he is the definition of a mixed martial artist. He is just elite everywhere. He has an elite level striking. He has great wrestling, great defensive wrestling, great submission defense, great Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I mean, the fact that he was able to escape two very close submission attempts against Brian Ortega, especially that guillotine, a mounted guillotine by Brian Ortega, is just shocking to me. And Alexander Volkanovski's so good. He has such a high fight IQ. He's unbelievably versatile. And I just think a lot of people look at Alexander Volkanovski as unbeatable. A lot of people look at Islam Makhachev as unbeatable, especially in their divisions. And the fact that you're having Alexander Volkanovski, who does deserve this. He's been the featherweight champion for a while. He's been knocking off a lot of guys in the featherweight rankings, you know, and there's not a clear deserving number one contender at this point in time. You can make the argument Josh Emmett, but nonetheless, Volkanovski's been around. He's paid his dues. He says he wants to go up and attempt to become double champion. I am really looking forward to this matchup. I cannot wait to see, you know, because even though we kind of write Alexander Volkanovski off a bit, I think it's because how dominant Islam Makhachev has looked. Alexander Volkanovski is the pound for pound number one fighter in the world. Islam Makhachev is pound for pound number two. Now, while I don't look into the pound for pound rankings all that much, that is saying something. This is two elite of the elite fighters challenging each other. And even though I do favor Islam Makhachev currently in this fight, you never know. Alexander Volkanovski may be the guy to go out there and stuff the takedowns of Islam Makhachev and outstrike him on the feet. This is a monster fight. I'm really looking forward to it. I feel like there should be more hype for this fight. Even though it's not really there, I think it's because people are underestimating Alexander Volkanovski. I'm even guilty of that a little bit, but I'm really looking forward to this main event. And I think that's kind of why the UFC, even once some good fights have fallen off, like Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa, and the Kai Kara France, Alex Perez fights have fallen off. They're like, you know what? We got champion versus champion, true lightweight champion versus true featherweight champion in the main event. They're thinking, okay, that's enough for this event. So I'm really looking forward to that main event. I cannot wait for Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. And that's why that is my number one reason I love UFC 284. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Did I miss any reasons that I should have had on this list? Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.